Hey, and welcome back to season 4 of No Credits Needed. If you're new here, this is a podcast about creativity where I interview a bunch of different creative people and we kind of talk about their creative process, their creative life, and we generally try to walk away with a lesson that we can apply to our own life and our own creative process. I just want to take a moment to remind you guys that if you've been enjoying the podcast so far and you like what we're doing with the show, go ahead and review us on Apple Podcasts, on Spotify. If you're watching the video right now on YouTube, go, click that like button down below and subscribe to the channel so you can see the future episodes that are going to be coming out. All of that helps us out tremendously. So if you could go ahead and do that right now, that help out a lot. I usually try to give you guys a little bit of an update on where I am creatively in my life at the moment. I think last episode I talked to you guys about how this was going to be a very draining week creatively for me since I was going to be coming up with two different ideas for pitches. And I'm also working on a short film as the assistant director on the film. Some updates regarding that. We just did shooting day number 2 on that film, and it was also very, very fun. It was a little bit shorter than the first day, but still very, very intensive and very productive. We're going to take, I think, 2 weeks off from shooting, and then we're going to do a whole 3 day shoot, like Friday, Saturday, Sunday. And that is going to be intense. Like if these just 1 day shoots have been crazy, 3 days back to back to back are going to be intense. But I'm also looking forward to it because I mean that's kind of what happens in the filming industry, and I want to get a feel for what that is. As far as the pitches go, I actually pitched my first one yesterday on Monday, and it went pretty well. I think half the class pitched already. The other half is going to pitch tomorrow on Wednesday. So hopefully, my pitch gets picked as one of the two that are going to get picked from the class. The other pitch is actually happening tomorrow night, and that's for film club. It's not for any of the classes, but it is part of school. But I think they said they had something about like 15 to 20 pitches, and you don't have to show up with a written script, just a very developed story idea. And I have one that I've been actually working on for the last maybe like year and a half at this point, and I've condensed it into a short film, and I'm going to pitch that tomorrow. And hopefully, that one only from Film Club, only one idea is going to get picked. So I have to really sell it. And I think I'm pretty confident that I can do that with experience in stand up and public speaking. I think I can do it. I think I got that part covered. I just don't know that the story is compelling enough for people to want to pick it. But that being said, I'm going to throw my hat in the ring, and hopefully I get picked for that. I want to get picked for at least one of the two projects that I'm pitching for. Again, that being said, if I don't get picked for any, I'll be fine. I'll survive. But I'd be so happy if one of those got picked. And that's pretty much it for me creatively this week. So that means I can just tell you guys about the guest for this week. For this episode, we have an actor and a stand up comic. His name is Ben Kliewer. I actually met Ben through another guest on the show. If you guys remember Tom Zayas, he's a filmmaker. He made a short film, and Ben is actually an actor in Tom's short film. And then that's how we kind of met each other. Ben actually put together a stand up show a couple months ago, and he's the first person to hire me like post pandemic for like my first stand up gig after the pandemic. And it was really fun. We had it in his backyard. He put together a bunch of cool comedians, and it was a backyard stand up show, but then he also introduced like some burlesque into that, which I had never seen before, but it worked out really, really well. It was a super fun show. And that's where I met Ben for the first time in person. And he's a really funny stand up comedian. And then he's a really, really good actor as well. We talk about a lot of his acting work in the episode. One of the things that we talk about the most is he has a sci fi series out right now called ATROPA. And I think right now it's available on YouTube. So I'm actually going to link that in the description so you guys can see his acting work. He's really, really good. It's a really cool sci fi show as well. I'll also relink Tom's short film where Ben is the main protagonist for that film as well. So you guys can get a feel of who he is. And Ben's a really active guy. He always has projects going on. So I really encourage you guys to follow him on social media, check out his website so you guys can be up to date on everything he's doing. Ben and I had a really interesting conversation about acting, a stand up, about creativity. So I just want to let you guys enjoy that conversation. So without any further ado, this is Ben Kliewer.
No problem. I did an interview with an editor a couple weeks ago,
uh,
and after it was all over, we did it over Zoom,
mhm.
and I realized I had not recorded the interview,
Oh boy.
and so I had to get back in touch with his publicist and be like, "Hey, sorry, mea culpa."
It's all good.
Yeah.
Was that for like a project of yours, or what were you doing?
So I do a few little things for a website, kind of a pop culture entertainment website called That Hashtag Show.
Hmm.
And so a lot of times they'll have me do a movie review, or they'll have me do an interview for a press junket or something like that. So
Mm,
I'll actually interview people who have done movies. So I was interviewing the editor for a Netflix documentary called 14 Peaks,
mhm.
which is really fascinating. It's a mountain climbing documentary,
Yeah.
and it's really cool. If you haven't seen it, I highly recommend it. But he was the
Mhm.
editor, so I did an interview with him, and I kind of got into doing a lot of interviews with special effects artists and editors for some
Mhm.
reason, and I just enjoy the process. I don't get paid for it; like it's not a job. I do it, you know, for fun.
Mhm.
Um, but it's also afforded me some really great opportunities because I've gotten to interview Seth Green and Kevin Smith, and I even got to interview Pauly Shore at one
Yeah.
point, which was hilarious.
That's so
Um,
cool.
yeah.
So did you like you just sought out that opportunity to be able to talk to people, or like how did that even come together? Because that seems like a, even if you're not getting paid for it, that seems like incredible experience either way.
Oh, it's a great experience. Essentially, it happened pre-pandemic. My wife and I are big nerds, and we love going to comic book conventions.
Hmm.
And we ended up through that kind of process. We ended up meeting this guy named Junior Felix, who's a great guy. But he at the time was working at a website called That Hashtag Show,
Hmm.
and just at the end of 2019, they were doing a lot of restructuring of the company and the website, and um, really trying to make an effort to make themselves more relevant, up with the nerdists and
Yeah.
comicbook.com and all those kind of pop culture websites. And Junior knows that I'm an actor and I'm a comedian and I'm good with a microphone in my hand, so to speak. And so he was like, hey, we're doing this restructuring. After the new year, we're going to launch a new website and do all this stuff. Do you want to come in and start doing some interviews and going to comic book conventions, interviewing directors, actors, all this kind of stuff? And I was like, yeah, let's make it happen. And then, of course, 2020 rolls around. We're like, okay, we're gearing up. We're getting ready to do this stuff. And then the world, the whole world shuts down. So,
Yeah.
um, and it didn't end up materializing in the same way. But with digital interviewing and online kind of press junkets, it really opened up a lot more opportunity for me to be able to interview some bigger names for different projects. So I don't know if I would have gotten to have a dialogue with Kevin Smith, for example,
Hmm.
if the pandemic hadn't happened. And of course, many terrible things have happened because the pandemic happened. But in some ways, it worked out for some folks, and I was fortunate enough to be one of those folks in some ways. So
Yeah,
yeah.
like it's weird. Like I think we might have talked about it a little bit at the show that you had at your place a couple months ago.
Hmm.
But like same for me. Like I felt like I had everything going for me right before 2020. Like shows were ramping up. I was getting some momentum going, and then just everything stopped.
Yeah.
But like same thing. I mean, I'm not interviewing like big name directors and stuff like that. But ever since I made the switch to do the podcast online and interview people online, like earlier today, I interviewed someone that's in Hungary, and like he
Oh
does
wow.
like pop like punk rock stuff and like all these types of things that I would have never reached out to that person or like even like opened my horizons to that point to be like, I could probably record this
Mm.
online. Like there's probably like some app where I can do it on. And but it's
Yeah.
like you said, I mean, obviously a lot of terrible things happen, but for a lot of people, like you just had to adapt, and it kind of opened up other doors in a weird way that we wouldn't have even considered before.
Hmm. Yeah, it's been weird. I also, for me, apart from the whole hashtag show thing, I had a lot of stuff really ramping up right before the pandemic hit.
Yeah.
I had kind of stepped away from stand up comedy and focused on acting a little bit more. Acting stuff was starting to take off for me a little bit more. And then I started picking up a few more stand up comedy things. And then, of course, everything went to pot and we all had to figure out what to do next. But um, so yeah, so it kind of sucked, and now it looks like we might listen to this podcast 6 months from now and be like, oh yeah, remember when we thought? Um,
Yeah. I mean, we've
but
been saying for like a year and a half now, like, oh, once the pandemic ends, then I'll start doing this.
right, exactly, and it has come time for us to figure out. It looks like we're going to be moving out of some of the restrictive nature of this. Hopefully, we'll
Mhm.
see. But I think it's time for me. I'm in a weird place because it's time for me to start pushing myself back in that direction and figuring out how to get yourself back started when you stopped hard and then
Bro,
had to readjust to another thing.
yeah,
You know,
dude, I've been thinking the exact same thing that you just said. Like I've been thinking all day yesterday, all day today. Um, well, you a couple things before I forget. You said you were doing stand up and you kind of stopped to start pursuing acting. I was also doing stand up and I kind of stopped. I was forced to stop because of the pandemic, and I'm kind of pursuing like screenwriting. And it's such a weird thing to have been stopped for, let's say, a year before we even started going back to work regularly and stuff like that. I mean, I know it's been 2 years, but about a year in, people were just like, well, we're gonna have to like start up the world eventually, so people
right,
started getting back into it. But it was so weird to like stop and like know what it felt like to not have anything going on, and then try to get the momentum to get started again, because you had like 20 years of momentum your whole life, and
right,
then all of a sudden it's like done.
yeah. Well, and that was the thing. I moved to Los Angeles in 2010
Hmm.
to, to pursue acting as my career. And it is a slog. It is a real slog. I don't care who you are. Some people I suppose, get lucky off the bat and might get on their fast track early on in their career. But for the majority of actors out there, it's a slog before you can really get a lot of traction. And even once you do get traction, um, it continues to be a slog in a way, just
Hmm.
a different level. And so, for me, it was funny because I'd been doing this for 10 years, give or take. I kind of sometimes I say I don't really count the first 2 years I was out here. I didn't really start my career until 2012 because the first 2 years was just trying to figure out what the heck to do. Like,
Hmm.
how do you even do this? Um, and then by the time 2020 rolled around, I'm having stuff happening. I got a couple of really great gigs. I had good momentum, but there was also the thing in the back of my mind that was like, if I could just take like 6 months off and not worry about going to auditions and not worry about, how am I going to, I'm bartending, I'm waiting tables. Am I going to make enough money this month? Am I going to be able to get my shift covered in order to get to that audition? Am I going to be able to do this and that?
Hmm.
Uh, and at the same time, for me, I got married in 2019. So then you have this responsibility to another person in your life, so to speak. So there was a lot coming together. And then it was like, it was one of those monkey's paw situations where it's like, you got your wish, but it wasn't exactly what you thought it was going to be. But I did take the opportunity to really take a breath
Hmm.
um, and gain 40 pounds. And so that's part of this weird starting and getting back into it thing is now I got to lose that weight because, I'm at this point where to look decent on camera, I either need to gain 40 more pounds or lose 40 pounds. Like I'm right in the middle that I'm not.
See, that's like that's a thing that you got to worry about when you're acting, huh? Because like when you're just doing stand up, it's just like people rarely care about like what you look like, and if
Right.
anything, like that you can make a joke out of it. But when you're
Oh yeah.
going to when you're gonna go do like casting and stuff, from what I've heard, is like some people are very specific in like what they are looking for.
Right. Well, and it's not even entirely that because I think there is, and rightly so, there is kind of the stigma about Hollywood and the film and television industry of like you have to be thin and muscular and look like Chris Hemsworth and or if you're a guy or look like a supermodel if you're a woman. And in a lot of cases that is what they're going for.
Hmm.
But I think the other thing is just looking at what a person looks like on camera because you look different. You really do look different on camera
Yeah.
than you do in person or in the mirror. And so, I have the weight on my body that I do right now, and I can go in front of a camera, like for example, I am right now, and I look fine in this shot. But if I'm in a cinematic kind of setting, it looks strange to the eye, at least to mine, because I'm like, that's not really how
Uh-huh.
I look. And it really is a case of I've seen myself and realized the camera does add 10 pounds. You look
Mhm.
bigger on camera than you do in real life. So if I was, say 190 pounds, I might look like a 200-pound guy on camera, which can work to your benefit or your detriment, I guess.
Yeah, and
Um,
it also always depends on, like, how the set's lit, how the DP is doing, like, what type of, aesthetics they're trying to give to their shot and stuff.
mhm,
Because I mean, you could go with a low angle and be like, "Oh, I have 10 chins. Cool, I didn't realize that
exactly.
before." Or it could be like a overhead, you're like, "Oh, shit, my jawline's looking nice." But like, either way, it's an illusion.
Well, one of the last projects that I filmed in 2019, I did a big Christmas commercial campaign for Mercedes Benz,
Mhm.
and it wasn't just a 30-second TV spot. It was like their 3.5 minute long like annual Christmas card to YouTube, or whatever. Just
Yeah.
their little Christmas promotional thing, and I played this car dealership guy, a Mercedes Benz car dealer who decides to open up the first Mercedes Benz dealership at the North Pole. And so I go up there, and it's basically me and my family living in this like old, uh, prospector's cabin, and just me. I'm the only one working at the dealership,
Uh-huh.
and of course nobody's buying cars. And then the German board of directors back in Germany decides that if I don't sell so and so many units by the end of the year, they're shutting down the operation. Of course, on Christmas Eve, Santa Claus comes in and buys all 50,000 units that I need or whatever.
Uh-huh.
But there was one shot that didn't make it into the commercial, thank God, because they did. There was a whole series of the well, it was like a montage in the middle of the
Mhm.
commercial of my slow descent into madness, and so there were we did a lot of like The Shining references, and I'm bouncing the ball against the wall and all this kind of stuff. But there was one where they had me lay down on the ground and had the camera directly above me and do one of these spinning pull out shots where it just it pulls out away from me and the camera turns
Mhm.
as I'm going insane. And I looked at the camera like they were immediately watching the playback
Yeah.
on set, and I went and looked at it, and I had about 9 chins just laying there like this on the ground. And I was like, oh, I hope they do not use that shot in the commercial because I look horrible. Fortunately, they didn't. But
To
yeah, it's all about the angles and the lighting and all that.
Yeah, like, what a weird thing to like, be in a profession where you have seen yourself from basically every angle, where, most human beings we're only gonna see ourselves in the mirror or,
Right.
like, on our selfie camera, but, like, the what I can compare to that is, like, when you open your camera and you didn't realize it was, like, on the front facing camera and you have your phone, like, down here, you're like, "Oh, fuck, what the fuck is that?" But, like, that you as an actor, you get that, times 10. I'm guessing you get a bunch of different ways to look at yourself, which, like, at the you have to be able to turn the self-critic off, I imagine, to be able to get through that because, we're all like that.
Oh, it's wild. And I think I know I'm not the only one. I think there's a lot of actors and even really, really successful, famous actors. You hear things like Chris Evans, for example. I was just reading the other day. He rarely will stay to watch the movie at his premieres because he just can't stand watching himself on screen.
Mhm.
you know, and that's something you kind of have to get over. And I've gotten to a point where I I try to, as much as I can, work on projects that I like.
Mhm.
Um, you know, there is a certain point early on in your acting career when you just kind of have to take what you can get as far as work goes. And so
Yeah.
you're doing, you shoot some project where you're like, I don't, this is crap. I don't like this. Um, but I did develop, I think, we'll see, because I haven't been doing it for close to 2 years now, but I kind of developed this disassociation
Mhm.
that, like, when I sit down and watch a project or a film or an episode or whatever that I'm in, I can kind of just sit and watch it like I'm watching, like, just anybody watching a show.
Yeah.
um, and I will still get nitpicky about, I wish they didn't use that take, or I could have done this better.
Yeah.
And I think that will stay forever. But there's, to a point, I can sit there and watch the scene and remember, oh, I remember when we shot this and what it was like and what we said on set. Or I can just sit there and watch it and kind of forget about all of that and just enjoy
Hmm.
the storytelling that's happening, because ultimately that's the reason I got into this, is my love of storytelling and my joy of in experiencing that and being a part of it. Um, so yeah, but it is weird. Sometimes I can't stand to see myself on camera, and most of the time I could have done better.
Yeah, no, I'm the same way whenever I see clips of myself doing stand up. Like, I'll if I watch it immediately after, I can disassociate myself and be like, oh, because I'm still on the high of like
Mhm.
being on stage. But if I watch it, a month later, I'm just like, could have done that a little bit better. So I know what you're talking about.
Oh yeah.
You kind of touched on the like you got into it for the storytelling. And you said you moved to LA 10 years ago, and I know you have a background in stand up. Did you try stand up as like a way to get some skills for acting, or were you trying to be a stand up comedian and then transition into acting, or are you just trying to do both?
Um, Everything said and done, kind of both. I don't. I don't have a desire to be a touring stand-up comedian and staying in a crappy motel in Ohio and
Yep.
doing nightclubs and being gone. And I can't really afford to do that. I have a wife. I like my wife, which is I think a big help in
Let's
that.
be clear. Yeah.
Yeah. So I would like to be able to stay home with my wife, or live at home with my wife, not live on the road, so to speak.
Mm,
Um, and for me getting into it, I just always loved stand-up comedians. When I was a kid, once I was like probably in my, I guess it's called the tweens, when I was like 12, 11, 12, 13, and I
mhm.
knew how to work the VCR, because this was back in the days when we still had VCRs.
Yeah.
I would stay up late and I'd watch Leno and Conan. And my favorite, I watched them for the opening monologue, of course. And my favorite times, unless it was a band that I really liked, because they would always have this three guest kind of formula. They'd have one guest, one big name guest, one kind of mid name guest, and then either a band or a stand up comedian.
Mhm.
And my favorite episodes were always the ones when they had stand up comedians. And so I would stay up. I'd see because they named the guests at the top of the show. I'd see if there was a comedian, and then I'd put a tape in my cassette, my VHS of stand up from late
Yeah.
night talk shows. I'd put it in and I'd just record the stand up comedian, and I'd just memorize cadences and I'd memorize jokes. And then around that same time, I think it was when I was 12 or 13, around there, um, Jerry Seinfeld came out with, was it I'm Telling You for the Last Time? Uh,
Oof.
I think it. I think it was I'm Telling You for the Last Time, which was basically like kind of a. It didn't end up being this, but kind of a swan song, like kind of a compilation, one stage show where he did all his classic bits.
Uh-huh.
Um, and I listened to that CD, and if you could wear out CDs, I would have.
Yeah.
um, and I would just listen to that on repeat, and I had the whole thing memorized. And so I would go to like talent shows at summer camp or at my junior high school and just do Jerry Seinfeld comedy. And I grew up in a small rural town in Kansas, and I'm doing
Mhm.
bits about cab drivers, and they're killing. But it's like there's no reference for that. There's no like there are no cab drivers in rural Kansas.
Uh-huh.
But I just had Seinfeld's cadence and his delivery just verbatim. And at some point in my late teens, I kind of realized I can't do that. Like, there's no future in just regurgitating
Like
another
it
comedian's set.
You're like, eventually Seinfeld's gonna run out of bits I can do. I have to start coming up with my own.
Exactly. It just amounted to me doing a Jerry Seinfeld impersonation, except
Uh-huh.
it was just his act. And so when I was kind of in, I guess it was in college and a little after college, I started trying to come up with my own material, and um, and this is just the parallel path of stand up comedy that goes with the acting that I'd also been doing this whole time.
Uh-huh.
And but with the stand up comedy, I started coming up with bits that I liked, and they were like kind of funny. But one of my favorite comedians is Patton Oswalt, and you know he talks about doing hosting open mics in like the 80s and 90s. And he said you'd see three kinds of comedians. You'd see, you know, people who were kind of funny, but who gives a shit. People who were really clearly going to be good comedians, and uh, fucking lunatics. Like those were the three people that you'd see at stand-up comedy open mics.
Yeah.
And my initial material was really, that's kind of funny, but who gives a shit?
Mm-hmm.
Because I think I was really trying to manufacture stuff that I thought sounded like a stand-up comedian.
Yeah.
And what I eventually, after I moved to LA, I kind of had started with some of that material. And then all of a sudden, I, one day, I was just like, wait, I don't even like this shit. Like, I don't even care. I don't even think it's that funny. I just think it sounds like it's supposed to be funny. And I said, well, what is funny to me? And it's, well, it's just when I'm talking to my friends and making fun of
Yeah.
stuff.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I think is funny. And so I started centering my, or writing my material around, what do I sound like when I'm just making fun of stuff with my friends? And I thought, well, let's just pretend that the audience is a big group of your friends and you're just making fun of stuff with them.
Yeah.
And that's where I really, you know, then I was living in Burbank. I was going to Flappers. I was connecting with other comedians. I was going to the Comedy Store. And then, of course, I got into the dark world of bringer shows and,
Oof.
you know, some of those snakes that exist in that realm.
Bringer shows in the sense of you would only be able to go up if you had a certain amount of people.
Basically, yeah, they're like, how many people did you bring? Okay, this is how many minutes you get,
Yeah,
you
fuck
know.
that, dude. Fuck
And
that.
or yeah, um I won't name any names, but I do remember I went to one of these with this guy who had brought me on to a couple shows,
Mm-hmm.
and he was doing one on the main stage at the Comedy Store.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I brought three people, and he's like, okay, we got you on, like, you know, fourth. And I'm like, cool. And then, you know, a couple guys went up, and then they're like, we got one more guy, we're going to slip him in. And then a couple more guys, and then another guy got slipped in, and then somebody else got slipped in, et cetera, et cetera. And I ended up not going on for like 2 hours.
Yeah.
And by that point, anybody who had come with me had left.
Mm-hmm.
And the two guys that went on stage right before me were garbage. I mean, they were just like, they upset the audience. They were so bad.
Uh,
So, you know that feeling. You just walk out in front of a hostile crowd,
yep.
and it doesn't matter if your stuff is killer or not. They're just in a bad mood.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember just at one point, I kind of had I made a joke, and I had a little throwaway line, almost like a Jim Gaffigan throwaway line, where it was like, I just commented on the previous joke and just said, that's stupid. And some guy in the crowd goes, yeah. And I was just like, did you just say yeah? And I like just ripped on that. And that was the best part of the bit. Like,
Mm-hmm.
just me riffing with some guy in the audience, and then I finished my set and got the hell out of there. But I was like, that was like the last time. I was like, I'm never doing one of these again. And ultimately, that feeling translated years later into what we ended up doing recently, where you came to my home and we did a backyard comedy show,
Mm-hmm.
where the point was, we just want you to come in, bring a group of your friends. We're gonna, you know, charge some money just so we can put on the
Yeah.
thing,
Mm-hmm.
and we'll give people some drinks, and they can hang out and chill and watch some different comedians. And it's a supportive environment to get you good video. And did we send you the video, by the way?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay,
I
cool.
just got it. Yeah. Yeah.
So
I was gonna say, because like you're the whole production, because I know it was you and a couple other people that put it together. I believe your wife was involved. She was like,
mm-hmm.
amazing at organizing the whole thing. Um, it's like a completely different environment than like 99% of the shows slash open mics in LA, and like super refreshing. And like every show in a way is a bringer show because, you know, if you know that it's a small production, you want to be able to bring people out to support not you but like the whole scene, the whole production. It's kind of like the same thing as like when you choose to go to a small business over order something on Amazon type thing.
Right.
Like you still want to bring people out. You know, they're gonna be charged for it, but it's, I feel like it's for a better cause than, you know, a bringer show for the Comedy Store or Flappers per se, right?
Right.
But I was, when we were talking about bringer shows, I just remember, you know, you try to do as many comedy clubs as possible. You try to book as many shows as you can, and you know, 95% of them when you're first starting out are bringer shows. But you
Mhm.
only have like a certain pool of friends that are willing to drive out to watch a show with you, and there's only so many times you can tag them in to see the same jokes over and over again on the same night. And so you're like, wait, I have 20 people that are willing to go. Should
Yeah.
I spread them out, sprinkle them like three here, or should I double up on these people? Like you end up budgeting the amount of friends that you have for like to see what shows you
Yeah.
can come to. But that whole scene is like, it's interesting slash fun when you're first starting out, but then you like really see what's going on. And you're like, I don't. It's not cool, not
Yeah.
fun.
Yeah, it gets that way, and it's somewhat similar, although perhaps not as. So, I guess part of it is that there was this huge stand-up comedy boom in like the 80s and 90s.
Yeah.
So guys our age, you know, like the story I told about me being 12 years old and taping him off of Conan or whatever, guys our age in our general generation, you know, love that shit, right? And so we, you know, now there's an oversaturation of stand-up
Hmm.
comedy in a sense, you know, and it seems like it's gone through this a couple times. There's like a really good era of stand-up, and then there's an oversaturation where you still have great stand-up, but there's so many people want to do it, and then that bubble bursts and it kind of fizzles and then starts to build back up again, and that kind of happened I think in the 60s or 70s that kind of burst and then it started building up, which is why we had this great era in the 80s and 90s. I speak as if I was alive during that time. But
Yeah, but like, you know, I have some Richard Pryor records, some like Steve Martin
exactly.
records, and then like you said, you if you could wear out a CD, you would have worn that out. I'm pretty sure I've worn out my Steve Martin record that I have, and it's
Yes.
just like it's so amazing to go back because like I mean we have comedians now that sell out stadiums, but it was like in the 80s and 90s, it was like the first time that, you know, comedy became like so mainstream,
Right.
where, you know, people were selling out stadiums, and you hear the Steve Martin record and you hear the huge fucking audience behind him, and it's just like so massive.
um, it's incredible. But I think now it's built into this thing where there's so many people that want to do stand up, and especially in a place like Los Angeles, because it's not simply because you want to do stand up. It's people that are like, I want to be seen. I want
Mhm.
somebody to see me and put me on TV or in a movie. Which there's nothing wrong with that. But then everybody who wants to be seen is like, I can do stand up, and a lot of times they can't, and I'm
Mhm.
not even confident that I can. You know, I said some stuff that made some people laugh kind of, and so I'm like, okay, I guess I'll keep doing this. But um it
No, I completely agree, dude. Like when I first started doing stand up, I relate so much to when you're talking about like, you know, I was the person that was funny, but you know, kind of meh.
yeah.
But I feel like, you know, most comedians are like that for maybe like the first 5 years of them doing
Oh
stand
yeah.
up. And like I did have that revelation of just like I feel like I've listened to so much like talk about how, you know, this stand-up comedian is so influential, and he talked about politics, and he did this, they did this, and I was like, I feel like I need to make a point with every joke. And like my whole spiel was like I started off with some philosophical thing and try to prove that, you know, my view is better than everyone else's, because I thought that that's what comedians had to do, like kind of push
Right.
the boundaries. And then I had that revelation with what you're saying about like I just want to joke around like I joke around with my buddies. Like I'm
Yeah.
not like, you know, over the top with my buddies. And that's when I, you know, just start being silly. That's when I started listening to Steve Martin. I was like, this is where it's at for me.
Yeah.
But I feel like everyone definitely has that little bump where you're making people laugh, and I feel like that's what people call like, you know, you can be hacky, and you know what pushes people's button to make them laugh, but eventually you have to find your own voice, and I feel like that happens with stand up and acting as well.
Yeah. And I think the biggest thing, and it relates to both stand-up comedy and improv, which I've also done a lot of improv and sketch, and acting, is you need to have a point of view.
Hmm.
That's the biggest thing. I think the point of view is the statement that you're making. And you can, if you have your own unique point of view. I love ridiculous and absurd comedy, which attracts me to people like John Hodgman, or like I said, Patton Oswalt, and
Hmm.
guys that go like way off into silly, you know, the realm of silly with what they're doing, but they're still, you can make a point or make some kind of statement in that. It's not so far from uh, making a choice as an actor. Oh, we want you to make a choice here. What the hell does
Hmm.
that mean? It just means pick something that is unique from you. Don't all of a sudden become a lunatic in the middle of this scene, but like your unique point of view as you portray this character, that's your choice. That's going to make this scene more interesting than just reading words off the paper. Um, and so I think the funniest thing that makes a comedian funny is a point of view. And that's one reason I think we're in a really great era of seeing really fucking fantastic female comedians and non-cisgendered, uh, non-male comedians, because
Hmm.
we are getting points of view that I think for a long time there was pressure. There was unfair pressure on, for example, female comedians to come out and do shock humor or gross humor or something like that, just to keep up, because they automatically started down here,
Yeah.
compared to male comedians. That was just the reality of the patriarchy of the time.
Yeah.
And now that I think that's been partially removed, I think that people, particularly non-male people, have an opportunity to not be forced into, I have to do this kind of humor because this is the type of person I am,
Hmm.
into just having their own point of view as a human being, regardless of creed or gender or whatever they present as. And they can just go up there, and I love it because we are getting so much fucking great comedy from
Yeah.
so many people. um Tig Notaro, for example, is one of my favorites. I love Tig.
Hmm.
And one of the comedians we had at the show that I'd never seen before, that you brought in, Jessica Rosas,
Jessica. Yeah.
uh, she was fucking hysterical. I
Yeah.
loved her. I loved her stuff, and I'm really excited to see. It's not just like straight white comedians doing stand-up comedy, and then everybody else, but nobody really pays attention to them,
Hmm.
and or non-straight white male comedians who are doing a very specific kind of comedy because that's what their that's what their row is.
Yeah.
You've got everybody coming from their unique point of view, and commenting on society
From
uh,
their perspective.
from their perspective, and
Hmm.
being able to relate it in the fact that we're all human beings and we're all so much the same. And I think that's why I went back to, like, that's why I go back to Jerry Seinfeld all the time, because he took these mundane everyday things, and
Hmm.
a lot of comedians leading up to him too. I certainly don't want to be like Jerry Seinfeld was the Michael Jordan. I love Jerry Seinfeld and I think he's wonderful, but he stood on the shoulders of a lot of giants.
Hmm.
And but he had his own point of view, and he took these mundane things that we all experience every day, like how many grams of fat are in this, and turned it into me cracking up as a 12-year-old.
Yeah.
um and a lot of people cracking up regardless of age. uh so I think point of view, I guess that's the short way of saying the long thing I just said.
Well, I mean, I think what you're saying is like what you said. I agree with everything you said, and I feel like that's why most of the comedians that I know were so. I mean, we're all like, there's that trope of like all comedians are terrible people and someone damaged them at some point, and that's why we're looking for attention all the time. Like you have that side of the thing, but there's also like a lot of the comedians that I know are like just, just sweethearts. Like
Yeah.
we're just like completely open to everything because we go to open mics, and you might hear the crazy person that walked in from, from the bar that just wants to speak their piece, but you see that person's point of view, and you're going to see, all these different types of backgrounds, not necessarily talking about their background, but you see their life from their perspective, and it's obviously informed by who they are, and you get a different glimpse into how many different infinite possibilities there are to like see the world, which I think is pretty cool.
Hmm.
Which kind of feeds into like I wanted to talk about your show, Atropa.
Yes.
You mentioned it to me in the email, and I had seen you in a short that Tom directed.
Hmm.
Chris Charles Jensen. I always call him
Charles
Chris
Jensen.
instead. Charles Jensen. And I saw that. I interviewed Tom about that, and that was a whole thing. But that was my first introduction to you. I saw you in that first, and then I saw
Hmm.
you at your house, and then you sent me the information for the show. And from there I kind of went down the rabbit hole of like, you have your website on where you have all the commercial that you've been on. I was like, damn, this you've done a lot of stuff. You've been in a lot of things. You have your drama reel, your comedy reel, and I watched, I think I don't know how long the show is. I watched up to 5 episodes, I believe, of the show, and you're great in it, man. I just want to say, like,
Thank
that's
you.
that's really cool that you're part of that project. I know every project has, tens, hundreds of people behind it, but I think that's really cool, and I wanted to know like how you got that gig specifically, because that seems like a really well put together, like serialized thing.
Hmm. So Atropa is, up to this point, and probably shall remain, one of the high points of my career, if not the.
Hmm.
I don't know if you could really name a number one high point of your career, but if I go on to do uh, Marvel and Star Wars movies, or if I go on to do nothing, Atropa will remain one of the high points of my career, because it was really the first project that I was involved with that was at that level. And I assume you plugged it at the top of the broadcast here, so I
Hmm.
don't necessarily need to go into all the details of how you find it, I suppose. But what was really interesting about it is it just came in as an audition. I didn't have any representation at the time. I was doing this thing that a lot of actors do when they come to LA, which is there's 3 or 4 kind of core casting websites that you can get on, and a few other kind of secondary ones.
Hmm.
Um, and there's things like Actors Access, which is the actors side of the breakdown services website, which is what all the professional companies use. But Actors Access has a lot more independent stuff,
Got it.
student films and that sort of thing. And every once in a while, you can get into a bigger production, but usually you have to have an agent or a manager who has the breakdown services side of the website who can send you that stuff.
Got it.
Um, there's LA Casting. There's also kind of second tier casting websites that smaller projects will often use. Now Casting, CAZT, CAZT, which has their own facility in Hollywood. And I'm not even sure where it is anymore because I haven't gone on an audition in 2 years.
Uh,
Um, but I think that one was through CAZD, uh, which is how I've always pronounced it. I don't know if they just call it cast, but it's spelled with a Z.
yeah.
Um, and it was just one of these things where it's like, we're shooting this sci-fi series, and it's directed by this guy named Eli Sasich, who had done, and they, as you want to do with those types of projects, you kind of list the bona fides of your, who's putting it on. And Eli
Yeah.
Sasich did this short film called Henry, and um, so and explain it was this sci-fi thing of this detective going to search for this crew of this missing spaceship, and it was very like influenced by the 70s and 80s sci-fi and Alien and Ridley Scott and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And I was like, as a huge nerd, I love I mean, yeah,
I was gonna
for
say, yeah.
I've got Jaws and Star Wars on my wall. I've got, and I already mentioned my wife and I go to comic book conventions. In fact, my wife and I met at a comic book convention.
Hell yeah.
So I was like, I have to be part of this project. And so I did what you're supposed to do, what you're taught to do and what you're supposed to do. You're like, let me go in and research who's putting on this project.
Yeah.
So I found Eli Sassage's stuff, and he's originally from Utah, I believe. And first of all, Eli's a fantastic guy, an incredibly creative guy. I love him to death. And he had done this project called Henry, which was another very sci-fi, very visually this, similar to Atropa.
Hmm.
And it's about a robot that wakes up in the wreckage of his spaceship after having been shut off for 100 years after the spaceship crashed.
Uh-huh.
And then uh, remember, like, putting together his programming and having essentially flashbacks to what happened right before the ship crashed. And it the only human being in the short, and this was a short film, and the only
Hmm.
human being in it was Margot Kidder, uh, who played Lois Lane in the Superman movies from the
Yeah.
70s.
Hmm.
And first of all, I was like, how the hell did he get Margot Kidder to play? And this was, I think, just a few years before she passed. And he's remembering, and she was his like owner, companion, whatever.
Hmm.
And he's remembering what led up to the crash, and then he ends up stranded on this planet. It was kind of almost very European style storytelling, where it wasn't a happy ending. It was kind of a sad ending and that sort of thing. But
Hmm.
the visual effects were incredible. It was a lot of puppetry, a lot of like, reminded me a little bit of Short Circuit, if you remember that movie from the 80s.
I
Um,
haven't watched it, but now I have to go back and watch it.
Gotta check it out. There's Short Circuit, and I think there's a sequel, and I think they're developing a reboot right now, but I'm not sure.
Oh.
But it's about a robot
Uh-huh.
that some guy builds in his garage or whatever. But I, I'm looking at this. I'm like, I have to be involved with this project, and I actually went into audition for the role of the detective, who ended up being played by Tony Bonaventura, who's a great actor as well, and a really lovely guy. And so I read for that part, and then they called me in. Well, of course, I went in and I schmoozed a little bit in the audition, and I was
Mhm.
like, "Oh, I watched Henry, and I thought it was great." But it also came from a very genuine place, because I did
Yeah.
genuinely like it. And then they called me back and they said, "We want you to come back in, but we want you to read for a different character."
Uh-huh.
And that ended up being the character I was cast as, which was Andrew Jensen, who's kind of the science officer on the ship. And so I went back in and read, and they liked me. They offered me the gig, and it was the first as close to like a professional studio gig as I had, because most of the time before that you're doing independent projects, student films, stuff where you might get like a per diem,
Mhm.
or most of the time they're like, oh, copy meal credit. And what that means is you shoot a film project as an actor, and your payment is in meals while you're shooting, credit in the film,
Yeah.
which is like, duh, you should get that anyway, and then a copy of the finished product,
Yeah.
which is kind of a crapshoot if you actually get that or not.
Mhm.
Sometimes you do, and sometimes you don't. But this one was like, okay, here's what you're going to get paid per day. We're going to issue paychecks every 2 weeks. We're going to have you sign W-2s and all this kind
Like
of
an
stuff.
actual job.
And I'm like, this is like an actual job. Like, this is what I've been trying to do, like act as a job.
Uh-huh.
And so we went in and we shot on this. We shot at the soundstage kind of up in the north part of the valley here in LA, and it's
Mhm.
a soundstage that's been used for all kinds of stuff. It's been used in Firefly and in different commercials, and a lot of stuff that's used an interior of a spaceship set. They use this soundstage because it's all already set up, and they've got a
Got it.
huge room for green screen and all this kind of stuff. So we spent, I want to say, 7 or 8 days. We shot Monday through Friday, and then I think I was on for a couple more days just to shoot the first episode, which initially was a proof of concept for a feature film. What they wanted to do was turn ATROPA into a feature film. And the original script had probably about twice as many characters.
Mm.
So there's about 5 or 6 characters in ATROPA, and originally there were 10 or 12.
I do see it being like a feature film because I got through like I got through 5 episodes so far, and like every end of an episode, I'm just like, well, and then it picks up on the next one, and you're like, I feel like this. I'm looking at it through the lens of like you could basically put all this together, and it
Mhm,
would still work really well as a feature film. Like the
mhm,
pacing of it, it's done very creatively to the point where like it's episodic,
right.
but you could rewrite a couple things to make it just flow like a whole thing. And I scrolled through the comments, and I was not the only person that thought that. There was a lot of people in there that were just like, "This should be a movie. What are you guys doing? Releasing
Right.
it one episode at a time."
Well, and that it was originally intended to be a movie, and they actually kind of had to do the reverse of that. They had to take a feature-length script and then figure out how to chop it up into 7 or 8 pieces.
Hmm.
And we shot that in, I think 2012. I think we shot that first episode in 2012, and they shopped it around, and they got a lot of the same. And this is secondhand, so this is what I was told originally. So
Hmm.
there may be some details missing if anybody's watching this and knows more than I do, or listening to this and knows more than I do. But they basically shopped it around. They kept getting the same response, like, we love it. It looks great. It's a great concept. We're not really interested in original sci-fi right now,
Mm.
just because it was not uh, feasible, financially. They couldn't
Yeah,
do the
yeah.
spend on it. So eventually they kept shopping it around, and they shortly after they had it edited and completed, they released it on Vimeo, and it won like Vimeo pick the first week it was up on Vimeo. Like, it was the top pick of the website in its first week. So they
Nice.
used that as kind of a feather in their cap to be like, listen, it won Vimeo, staff
Hmm.
pick of the week, fan pick of the week, whatever. And kept getting a lot of encouraging messages about the product, but no interest in actually producing it. And so finally, I guess Vimeo came back to them and said, "Hey, we are launching our Vimeo original series program. Would you be interested in turning this into a web series where it's like 12 to 15-minute episodes?"
Hmm.
And they were like, "Fuck yeah, yeah, sure. We can get our thing made. Absolutely." So they restructured it. They rewrote it into I think it's an 8 episode season,
Yeah, from what I
and
understood, it was like 7 or 8. Yeah.
7 or 8, yeah. And they came back to all of us, and this is, I think, like 3.5 years later. This is like late 2015, early 2016.
Hmm.
They come back and they're like, "Hey, you want to return and do your character again for this web
You're like,
series?" And we were all like, "Fuck yeah."
hell yeah.
So we end up going back. They got the same cast, most of the same crew. Of course, the top people, Eli and all of them, were the same. Coming back to film the other 6 or 7 parts of this series, and that was like a month-long shoot. We shot 5 days a week for a month, and I'll never forget when we got back. So the second episode starts with the same shot of us from the first episode that the first episode ends on,
Hmm.
and then we jump into action. Well, we had to create this exact same shot like 3.5 years later with the
Yeah.
same people, with the same crew on the same set, and it was just surreal to be there. And then we worked for a month on this thing, or maybe it was a little more than a month.
So the first episode was just intended to be a proof of concept for a feature.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting. Okay, so they didn't go back and redo the first episode. They were just like, we got that locked down. Let's just make the other 6 or 7.
Basically, yeah. And then they kind of had to, I think they kind of had to rework some of the rest of the script to make that first episode make sense as the first episode, and then
Hmm.
launch the rest of it off of there. And I thought they did a great job. And but it had like orchestral music composition.
Yeah.
It had incredible visual effects. Michael Ironsides has a guest appearance in one of the episodes. I don't know if you got to that one yet or not. There's a
Probably not.
flashback. There's a flashback episode to
Uh,
look at the detective's like history on Earth,
hmm.
and I think that's episode 6 or 7 or something like that. But so Michael Ironsides is in that one, and
That's
so this
cool.
was like a legit production. And then, right as we were finishing it up, or right as they were finishing it up after my work was done on it, Vimeo came back and they're like, hey, we're kind of scrapping our original series program, so sorry. And so then they ended up having to shop it around again. It ended up on Studio Canal's streaming platform, Studio Plus, or as they call it, Studio Plus, because they're a French company. And so it was on that exclusively for a while. That was behind a paywall. And then that ended, I think that contract ended after a year or something like that. And then it was another couple years. And then just in the last year, Dust picked it up to put it on their streaming platform, but it's also available for free on YouTube, which is great because you can go watch it
Yeah,
without having to pay a subscription fee or something like that. And it's just fun. It's drama, it's sci-fi. I get to do one of these big spiels with a hologram in front of me,
I
and
saw that episode. That was amazing.
oh gosh, it was so fun. And of course there was nothing there. I
Yeah,
was just like they're like, it's gonna be hovering right here, so just point at stuff there and we'll animate it in later.
fucking nailed it, dude.
Ah, thank you. But it was fun, and that was like a dream come true, having grown up on Star Wars and Star Trek and watching Firefly and all this kind of stuff,
Hmm.
wanting to be in sci-fi and then being able to just
Yeah,
stand on. Oh, go ahead.
no, sorry to cut you off. I was because you were talking about how it got shopped around all the time, and I was like, well, at the beginning of the of every episode is like in production with Vimeo. I was like, then why the fuck is this on YouTube? Because I feel like
Right.
they're competitors. But now your whole story like feeds into like why that makes sense. Because I was like, this seems why is it not on Vimeo if it was made by Vimeo?
Right.
What I'm
So
one.
they were the producing company, so they fronted, as far from what I understand, and I don't know all the details, but they fronted a lot of the cost for us to actually shoot the season. So
Mhm.
they're credited properly as
Yeah,
you know
and that makes sense. Yeah, as a producer of the show, you got to get your credit on there up top.
right.
But yeah, from what I've seen so far, that like you said, like I saw some of your other things, and all of that is like super cool. But Atropa, the stylistic part of it, it stands out from your other work. And as far as like the cinematography of it, the special effects, the music, like you said, the soundtrack, all of that, and I can see why you say that that's like the highlight of being an actor because I can't imagine how that must feel to do all those, student films, which I'm sure are amazing and great and a fun experience to do, and then get to that point where you're just like, oh, like this is the real deal. Like this
Mhm.
is what I've been waiting for my whole life. So I'm glad that people can watch it now for free and it's
Yeah.
not behind a paywall anymore.
Yeah, and I like I said, I go back and watch it. Like I enjoy it, and that's part of that disassociation I was talking about. I was like, I can just watch it and be like, huh. Sometimes I look at my speech where I'm like, oh, I could have said this better, but uh, my facial expression could have been different. Um, but yeah, and I think in order to get through all of that stuff, because I have worked on some really fantastic student films and
Hmm.
independent projects, and I've also worked on some real shit shows. And in order to get through all that, especially if you're not getting paid for that time that you spent, which is sometimes 18 hours in a day,
Yeah.
and then you have to go off and try to make your rent money doing something else, bartending or whatever, um, which I've also done a lot of. Uh, you have to really love it and you have to really want to do it. And I think that is where I spill off into things like stand up comedy and improv, because they are just other ways for me to outlet that creative energy and that point of view, and trying to, one of the reasons I love doing stand up is the same reason I love doing live theater, because
Hmm.
there is an interaction with the audience. You get that immediate feedback, which you don't get when you're shooting in front of a camera.
Yeah.
But there's so much other stuff that can happen when you're shooting in front of a camera that you can't do in a live performance. And of course, that technology is getting way better if you're going to see any of the shows in Vegas or any of this kind of stuff, where they're doing stuff in live performances that's insane with visual effects.
Hmm.
But that's also like, I can't do gymnastics, so I'm probably not going to do that kind of stuff.
Well, I imagine that like doing stand up, doing live performance, doing improv, acting, all of it feeds into itself, and it's just like a never ending cycle of just like, well, I did this in stand up, so I could probably apply something of this to my live performance, and vice versa, and into acting. And that's the cool thing about being a creative person, is just like nothing that you do is wasted. Like
Mhm.
you're going to learn something over here that you can apply to your previous projects or whatever it might be. And shit, I had a question in mind. I just lost my train of thought. But I mean, that's what happens.
It's all good.
Um, no, I was just I was just nerding out about all your work, dude. I saw your website, and like you said, I'm gonna plug it at the top of the show, and I'm definitely gonna plug Atropa and all that stuff. So I definitely think people should check you out. Um, I I think it's I we didn't talk about the live theater, but
Mhm.
uh, I haven't had a chance to be in all my guests' house before, and you're one of the guests that I've been in your house before.
You
And I
have,
feel
it's
like
true.
when I made it into your house to use the restroom, I saw that you have on your wall a bunch of stuff from theater, a bunch of playbills. And
Mhm.
I was going to ask you, but you already answered the question. I was going to ask you, like, are you big into theater, or do you just collect those? But
Well,
clearly, that's
and
part of your outlets.
those are actually all my wife's.
Oh, really?
So my wife actually has a theater degree from Long Beach State.
Cool.
And that's part of the reason she had done a lot of theater. She was actually leaning a little bit more into the casting side of things, but she had done a lot of stage managing as well as part of the theater program. And so that's why you mentioned earlier she was stage managing and event managing the show
Hmm.
that we did, the stand-up show. And that's why she was such a badass at it, because she's not like that's she's just automatic. uh,
It's so important to have a good, like, stage runner, and, like, have them take care of all that so you can focus on what you're doing, and, the producer can focus on what they're doing. It's
mhm.
so essential.
And so she has a lot of background in theater as well, and that's one of the reasons why. I mean, we're a couple of weirdos, and we get along so well. We really believe in that kind of mantra of like, everybody's weird, but not everybody's the same kind of weird. And so when you find somebody else whose weird matches your weird, we call it love, and then you stay together in your weirdness.
Oh,
And
bro.
and that's us to a T, I think.
I completely agree. Like, just yesterday, my wife and I were doing just some crazy dance in the middle of the living room. It started off with a hug, and then we started singing and dancing. We're just like, "What the fuck are we doing? We're some
Exactly.
complete weirdos." And she's
Yeah.
like, "Yeah, but it's cool. Like, you're my type of weird." I was
Yeah.
like, "Yeah, it works out." And like my wife is doing art history as her master's, and I feel like you might be able to relate to, to a certain degree. But having a partner that's also somewhat in the arts, and that kind of appreciates going to watch movies or going to museums, or she
Oh,
can
yeah.
teach me so much about art and all these things that are like out of my realm of creativity. And then I can
Mhm.
teach her about, whenever we watch a movie, I'm annoying to 95% of the people that watch movies with me, but my wife loves it when I point out, like, "Oh shit, that was a one shot. That was like 5 minutes of a one shot. Oh damn, did you see how they changed the angle of this?" I was like, no one else shuts me up. Sorry, everyone else
Right.
shuts me up, but she's just like, "Oh wow, that's so cool," and
Yeah.
it's fun to have a partner like that in life.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. No, I'm really fortunate that we met. I remember one time telling my mom before she and I, it was either before we were engaged or before we were married, before one of those big milestones. I was talking
Mhm.
to my mom on the phone and just telling her about this weird conversation or activity or something that my wife and I had done together, and my mom was just like, "Yeah, you two better get married, because I don't know if either one of you are going to find somebody else who's going to do all this with you." So
Yeah. Yeah, I think the moment we realized we were like cool and perfect for each other was when we had to quarantine. We had a COVID scare, and it was like immediately after we got engaged, we spent a whole week in quarantine together in a room. And if that's not a test, I don't know what is.
yeah,
And so we went crazy together, but we didn't drive each other crazy. Like, we were just going insane in sync, and it was like, oh, cool. I I can envision me like spending the rest of my life with you. It's good to know that.
yeah. Yeah. Well, and that was a big thing for us right when we started with the pandemic. I was bartending, she was working in office, so she'd work basically 9 to 6. I'd leave at like 5:30 to go work at the bar, and then I'd
Hmm.
be gone until 10 or 11 or something like that and come home. So we didn't, we were for at least 5 days out of the week, we were kind of ships passing in the night. And
Hmm.
then pandemic starts, they send everybody from the home from the office, they shut down the bar and restaurant, and we just have to live together. And the first couple of weeks, we were just really bugged with each other, I think, because we just weren't
Yeah.
used to spending that much time together. And then it all kind of settled out. And
Mhm.
and then we were like, oh yeah, okay. And it really, I think, solidified for both of us that this is the person that I'm supposed to be with, because I wouldn't be able to do this with anybody else. And I wouldn't want to do this with anybody else, just be stuck in our house.
Yeah.
Um, and so it ended up being this. At first, we were like, "Oh no, we got into this tiff." They weren't really like fights or even arguments. They were just like we were bugged with each other.
Yeah.
And then we were like, "Oh no, what does this mean?" Because we're both super sensitive, artistic types.
Yeah.
And then after a while, we were like, "Oh no, we're fine."
Yeah. Yeah, I think the quarantine tested a lot of relationships, and I mean, luckily, you and I were able to get out of the quarantine and be like, "Okay, cool, we're solid, we're solid, we're solid."
Mhm.
And I feel like a lot of people realized through that test that, good for them too. Like, you don't want to end up with someone that you actually don't like being around.
Yeah,
So that's another positive from the pandemic that came up. We're just like, I realize that you are the perfect person for me. Good to know. Good to know.
good to know. Good to know. Yeah.
All right, buddy. Well, we've kind of reached the hour mark, which is
Oh
more or
man,
less where we like to end the show. But I want to ask you just one last question.
absolutely.
We I asked the same question to everyone that's on. I know you said you moved to LA 10 years ago. You've been
Hmm.
doing stand up. You've done commercials. You've done short films. You've done student films. You've done all types of stuff.
Hmm.
And you can pick whichever one you want. But if you could go back in time and try to give yourself some advice that you've learned over these past 10 years, and something that you could tell yourself, but that you might think that someone listening to this might find useful in their life. They might be going through the same thing. What would you say?
Um, there's a short story that goes along with what I would tell myself,
Hmm.
because and this is any advice that I would give to actors that are just getting into it, or even people who've been doing it for a long time.
Hmm.
Were you about to say something? I don't
No,
know.
I was going to say, yeah, you can choose whichever one you want.
But this is definitely advice I would give to myself. I was in an acting class a while ago, and I had, well, this was many years ago when I first moved here. This was probably 2010 or maybe 2011. And I was in this really intense acting class that intimidated me, and I ultimately left that particular acting school just because I realized I had ingrained a lot of that intimidation, and so I wasn't able to get out of it as much as I should have, because it was the first acting school I went to when I got to LA, and acting school is a very important thing for actors to,
Hmm.
just like the gym is important for athletes.
Yeah.
And uh, I was working with an acting coach named Brett Rickaby, who is really great. He is an actor. He's been in tons of stuff. One of the he was in something bigger recently, and I can't remember what it was, but he was one of the guys in the movie The Crazies.
Okay.
He was kind of, oh gosh, I can't even remember his character name, but he's done a ton of work, and he's been really, really, had a lot of success, and he's really great. But he was coaching me in this acting class, and I was doing this scene across from this actress, and we were both really trying hard. And I think that's one thing that I did a lot early on when I came here, and it's still a trap that I can fall into, where I try really hard.
Hmm.
And we were in the middle of it, and there was kind of a silence, and Brett just leans in and he goes, "You're just kids playing. That's
There
all.
you go.
You're just kids playing." And what he meant by that, and how I took it at least, but I'm fairly certain this is what he meant, was when you're a kid and you're on the playground and you're playing cops and robbers or whatever you're playing,
Yeah.
you're a child, you're committed to that role. You are living the life of that thing that you are playing as. You are that cowboy, you are that cop, you are that robber. And for me, that kind of unveiled a whole new thing of like, I don't have to try really hard to be good at acting. I need to commit to the play of it. And you can do that even if you're doing really hard drama or really, heavy drama. You're still in the world of play where you are giving yourself up to being this character in the scene and allowing yourself to exist as that person. That's the sense of play. It doesn't always necessarily have to be fun, because sometimes it can be work and it can
Hmm.
be difficult and hard, but there has to be that sense of play. And I think for myself as a young actor, especially coming out of high school and college and moving into on camera acting and that sort of thing, is if you're trying real hard, it just makes acting hard. It makes it not fun, and it makes it not good. And ultimately, if it's those three things, then it's not worth it. Um, and so to keep that sense of play and to be a kid, just a kid playing,
Hmm.
is my biggest piece of advice for myself as a young man, or anybody who's an actor or a performer.
Because as a kid, you believe it. You don't need someone to tell you, like, get yourself in the mind of this cop because, this cop was wronged when he was 23 and this and that. You're just a kid and you
Mhm.
put yourself in that mindset, exactly like what you were saying. And if you, it's, I think what I can relate it to is like stand up. If you try to be funny or if you try too much, it's going to come out like a script.
Right.
Same thing I imagine with acting is just like if you try too much with acting, you can see the script behind, your eyes and you're thinking about what lines are coming out next.
Hmm.
Um, you have Star Wars in the back. I feel like to quote Yoda is just like there is no try, just do.
Do or do not.
Do or do not.
There is no try. That's one of my favorites.
Yeah.
Do or do not. There is no try. And fun, funny enough, I kind of learned that lesson previously as a stand-up, where I had my manufactured stand-up comedy, and I
Yep.
realized that wasn't working because it was what I thought was supposed to be stand-up comedy instead of just doing my thing.
Yep, I had that revelation of just like I had my set ready to go, and then I spent 5 minutes riffing on the audience, and that went way better than what I had written that night. I
Yes,
was like, oh, this is what they're looking for. They just want me to be
exactly.
funny, not try to write down a what I think is a genius bit and
Yeah.
perform it to them. No. All right, dude, that's a great piece of advice. I love asking people that question. I feel like a lot of listeners like hearing the answer, but it's mostly just for me. I'm asking for advice for myself. But I always get cool advice from everyone everyone has a different perspective. So I like that.
Yeah.
Thank you
Oh,
so much for being on, man.
absolutely. There was one more thing I wanted to plug that I forgot
Go ahead.
to. I am also on a podcast called The Con Guy, and it's me and a group of other people, and we're called The Con Guy because we follow comic book conventions,
Hmm.
and we talk about pop culture stuff and movies and TV shows, comic books, toys, collectibles, all that kind of stuff. All the sorts of things you would go to a convention for. There's a Con Guy family of podcasts. We also have the Con Girls, the Con Kids, who are some teenagers that cover stuff from their perspective, as well as
Hmm.
the Scare Guy, which is the fun side of horror. We cover the horror conventions and horror movies and all that kind of stuff, but from a fun perspective, not necessarily trying to scare you, but yeah. So the Con Guy generally airs on Monday nights on that hashtag show network, or you can go to theconguy.com.
Hell yeah. All right. And like I said, everything that we talked about, I'm gonna link it in the description. You guys can check
Sweet.
Ben out on his website. You can check out the short series that we were talking about. Everything that you guys need to know is gonna be in the description. And Ben, thank you so much for being on, man. It was nice having an actual conversation with you.
Yeah, that was awesome. I bring me back anytime. I love doing this kind of stuff.
I absolutely will. Mark my words.
All right,
All right,
sounds
buddy. See you soon.